Hello, my name is Peter Fonagy and I'm Chief Executive of the Anna Freud Center. I'm absolutely delighted to be able to introduce this seminar. It's particularly important to us because it comes as we launch our 5 steps framework, and I just want to touch on this very briefly for you. A word about the Anna Freud Center. Our aim is to help transform the experience of children, young people and their families with issues of mental health. We do this by carrying out research to improve understanding of mental health and resilience, and evaluate and improve treatments and services for children and families that are offered worldwide. We use our research to develop tools and services. We also teach professionals and researchers in the latest skills and tools to improve mental health. And finally, we take our leading role in the development of policy and practice in the UK and beyond to ensure that it is built on evidence, tested experience, and has the input of children, young people, and their families. Why are we launching this framework? We know there are other frameworks around, but we want to be clear that it isn't a framework which tells schools and colleges what to do. We've created this in the spirit of collaboration in which we can offer expertise in mental health and share it with schools and colleges who are doing such an amazing job at the moment, embracing and adapting to their own settings. It's been created by mental health experts and teachers together. We've done our best to bring the two disciplines together to mutual benefit and, of course, to the benefit of children and young people. The 5 steps we've identified in our framework start with leading change. It's the obvious place to begin because what we are talking about is transformation in education, and that requires leadership. We are very lucky today to have 3 eminent speakers who have such knowledge in this field and who can share with you their experience of leading change and their knowledge how leadership works in schools. This is the first of a series of seminars, and we'll be holding one every half term. Each one focusing on one of the 5 steps. I hope after this one you will feel inspired to join our future seminars. At the Anna Freud Center, one of our key principles is collaboration. We are privileged to have our speakers join us today, but we would also like to thank you, our remote audience, for joining us. It's only by working together and combining our individual and collective skills and knowledge that we can achieve change. We are inviting questions throughout, which will be discussed at the end. You can do this by posting on the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. At the end of this talk, we will ask you to fill in an evaluation form on this seminar. We'll ask you to respond to 3 questions about mental health and early years so that we can be informed by your experience in the way we take the work forward. Our tweeting on the screen now, we are on @AFNCCF, and please tag us and use the #5step hashtag. The format of today is that in a minute, I will introduce our first speaker, who's Jamie Smith, our Director of Mental Health and Wellbeing in Schools. She will talk for 15 minutes, and then Dr. David Frost will speak for around 30 minutes about leadership in mental health in schools. I will then introduce Dr. Julia Greer, who will talk about her own experience of leading a whole school approach to mental health based on her experience as head teacher. But first, to Jamie Smith. Jamie is our Director of Mental Health and Wellbeing. She started her career as teaching in a London secondary schools. After teaching, Jamie worked for London Borough of Camden, working with children and young people at risk of exclusion and from education. Jamie worked for the NSBCC for 8 years, first coordinating outreach work with hard-to-reach children and young people across London, and then as London and South East manager of the NSPCC school service, leading a team to deliver safeguarding work for over 3,000 primary schools. Since joining the Anna Freud Centre, Jamie has led on all schools work at the centre, including building the Schools in Mind network, a free network for all school staff and allied professionals, which I would actually strongly encourage you to join. It shares academic and clinical expertise regarding the well-being and mental health issues that actually affect schools very much. She leads an extraordinary portfolio of work, including the DFE Link program, which is reaching out to all schools and mental health services across England to help create integrated support and lead a sustainable change in the delivery of children and young people's mental health services. The Link program is part of her vision to support the whole school approach to all schools. And with this, I would like to hand over to Jamie, an extraordinary individual who I am proud to call a member of our staff.
Thank you, Peter. So huge welcome to everyone. Thank you so much for being here today and joining our first seminar. So my name is Jamie Smith and I'm the director of the schools programme here at the Anna Freud Centre. And I just wanted to start off this afternoon telling you a little bit about the work that we do in the schools team here at Anna Freud, and specifically about our brand new whole school approach that we launched this week, which Peter just said is called the 5 Steps Framework, because we've identified 5 steps that we think will support schools and colleges to really embed good mental health at the heart of everything that they do. So as Peter said, this is the first of a series of seminars that we're going to run across this academic year, each seminar focusing on one of the steps. And today we're thinking about leadership. So I'm really excited that shortly we'll hear from experts in education leadership and from a head teacher who can talk really about how do you lead change in a school to prioritise mental health, and what does that look like, and how do you go about creating that shift in culture in your school. So we're going to come on to that shortly, but before we do, I wanted to just tell you a little bit about how we developed the 5 Steps framework, how we got to where we are today, and the work that we're doing at the centre that sits behind the framework. So, okay, how do I move the screens on? That's the next question. Sorry, can anyone help me move the slides through? Sorry, everyone. Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Can people see that now? So the Anna Freud Centre is a child mental health charity, and we're unique in the sense that we bring together research, resources, training and clinical practice all under one roof. We have a range of experts that work here at the centre, from education professionals, clinicians, mental health professionals and researchers and academics. And really everyone works with one aim. Everyone comes together and brings their expertise together with one aim, which is to improve outcomes for children and young people in relation to mental health. And everything that we do really is about the evidence. I think it's fair to say at the Anna Freud Centre that our mission is really to translate the research into practice and to really get that evidence base out into the community. And for us in schools, we want to make sure that that knowledge is transformed into action for schools and colleges. So schools really need to know what works in relation to mental health. And here at the Anna Freud Centre, we've got more evaluated research and practice and resources than any other children's mental health charity. So we really make sure that everything that we do is grounded in the evidence. And also alongside that, as a former teacher, I want to make sure that everything we do is actually useful on the ground for schools. So making sure that it's accessible, that it's practical and it's really user-friendly, and that teachers and school leaders can pick it up and use it tomorrow in the classroom. So with that in mind, I want to just give a bit of an example of some of the work that we do across research and practice resource development, and training that gives you a sense of where we've got to with the 5 steps and how all of our work has led into it. So firstly, in terms of research, we lead the Education for Wellbeing programme, which is a programme that is funded by the Department of Education and which we deliver alongside our colleagues in the Evidence-Based Practice Unit. It's one of the largest research trials of school-based mental health interventions in Europe. We're working with over 370 schools, primary and secondary, to test 5 different mental health interventions, because we really want to understand what makes a difference for children in classrooms. We're really looking with this research to expand the evidence base. In terms of our practice, we founded and support the Pairs Family School, which, for people that don't know, is an alternative provision school for children aged 8 to 13, for anyone that is at risk of exclusion or has been excluded from mainstream school. And the school sits alongside our offices in King's Cross. And the model of the family school is really unique in the sense that the school has children working alongside family members, parents and carers and school staff together in a school setting, supporting learning and supporting mental health. And the model is hugely successful. You can see from the slide there that we have 64% of children return to their former school within 4 months, and 95% keep their place. So the family school model is so successful that the family school team are trying to expand this and support the work of local authorities and mainstream settings. And there's a range of training that they're doing with schools, with local authorities and parents to really work together to look at reducing exclusions from mainstream. In terms of training and learning, we have a whole range of training that we offer. We've just recently finished the mental health awareness training that we were delivering on behalf of the Department of Health and Social Care, which aimed to raise awareness with secondary school staff of key mental health issues. And we're also rolling out the LINK programme, which is another national initiative funded by the DfE, which really looks to improve outcomes for children and young people by improving joint working between education and mental health. This is work that we've been doing since the pilot of the LINK programme back in 2015, and we've already delivered it to over 100 CCGs. The programme is completely free and we're offering it to every school and college in England up to 2024. The work has been evaluated externally and it's been proven to be very successful. It's a 2-day training where we train teachers and school leaders alongside mental health professionals and other stakeholders to think about how we could improve joint working, to improve understanding, communication, and to really get schools and colleges and mental health professionals to think about, for example, improving referral routes, understanding referral protocols. We're really proud of this work and it's really making a difference on the ground. And lastly, I wanted to talk about resources and the work that we do around resources for schools. So I think we can all agree that there's a huge amount of resources out there for schools, and actually in many ways it's quite overwhelming. It's quite hard to navigate and for people in a school to know what are the resources that you can trust. So for us at the Anna Freud Centre, we're really proud to be working on the Mentally Healthy Schools website, which is a completely free UK-wide website that brings together quality assured information, resources and primary schools. On the site, we hold resources from across the whole sector. So we've got about 300 different authors of resources on the site. But you know that if you use a resource from our site, that it is quality assured. It has been assured by a clinician and it has been assured by an education professional. So you can know that it's something you can trust to use in your school. You can know that it's the best that's out there. We're really proud of this site. It's had over 500,000 users since we launched it. And because of the success, we're now looking to expand it to support secondary schools. So we'll have new secondary pages in 2021. So that gives you a flavour of the work that we're doing across the sector, across research, across practice, across resource development, and across training. And really, we wanted to think about how all of this work that we are doing could really be simplified and channeled into an easy tool to support schools. As you can see, we're already working with over 1 million children and young people through the work that we're doing, but we obviously want to reach more. So we were trying to think of how we could distill this work into something that schools and colleges could pick up and really support them to approach a whole school framework in a really holistic way. So that's why we've launched our new 5 steps, the new framework. So why would you do a whole school framework? Why would that be something you wanted to do? Well, I think that we see already that children and young people's mental health is really at the heart of education policy now. We see that through the government green paper, we see it through the new RSHE curriculum, and I think more than ever, the pandemic has shone a light on the vital role that schools and colleges play in not just promoting, but actually protecting and supporting and maintaining the mental health of our children and young people. So schools are really the place to start. We know that a whole school approach will benefit everyone, and our 5 steps framework engages not only pupils, but also staff and also parents and carers. We know that child mental health is everyone's responsibility, so we need to be involving the whole school community, and we can do that through a really strong whole school approach. We also know that whole school approaches benefit attainment and attendance, so they really are beneficial. So why our our 5 steps? So most importantly is to say that it's completely free. Anyone can access it via our web pages at any time, free of charge. It's a really simple and easy to use tool. It's interactive, so you can work through it through our web pages in any order that you like, at your own pace, and making it work for your school. You know the areas of support that your school will need, and you can work through the steps accordingly. The 5 steps has been written by teachers and school leaders in conjunction with mental health experts here at the Anna Freud Centre, and also we've tested it. We've been working on this for about 3 years now, and we've been trialling it out with schools and colleges across the country to see what really works on the ground and what is helpful, and we've been refining it accordingly. So if we just go back, so these are the 5 steps framework. This is what it looks like. So these are the 5 things that we've identified that we think that you would need to implement in order to have a whole school approach. So the first step is leading change. And as I've said, we're going to talk about that in more detail today. And when we're thinking about leading change, we're thinking about policy. We're thinking about how are you engaging with governors? Who is leading the change in your setting? Do you have a mental health lead? And what does that mean, for example, for your school development plan? So how are you demonstrating leadership? The second step is about working together, and that very much speaks to the work that we really try to champion here at the Anna Freud Centre, working across your whole school community, so working with parents and carers, as we do in the family school, and also looking outside your school community to local stakeholders, to the child mental health professionals in your area, to the local voluntary sector, and thinking about how you're engaging with them and including everyone's voice. The third step looks at understanding need. And for me, that's really important. How do we know what the need of our pupil population is? How do we know what their mental health and wellbeing needs are? And indeed, how do we know what the needs of our staff are? So understanding need is really about using tools to measure and monitor the wellbeing of your pupils and your staff. And we have enormous expertise here at the centre in that, in colleagues at Cork, the Child Outcome Research Consortium, and also Evidence-Based Practice Unit colleagues who really are leading the way in developing tools and resources for schools to use to measure and monitor and really understand what is the need of your community and then put in place interventions accordingly. Also, there's lots of resources on there to evaluate. If you're already buying interventions into your school, how do you know that they're working or having the impact that you want? So we've got some tools there that you can use to help evaluate anything that you're doing already. Promoting wellbeing is really about how are we making sure we're talking about mental health in all aspects across the school curriculum, informally and informally. How are we ensuring that we have student voice through, for example, student council or through peer support schemes? How are we making sure that we're using resources across the school year, not just on, for example, World Mental Health Day, but throughout the year using good quality mental health resources? And lastly, but definitely not least, is how are we supporting staff? This is something we've been working on in the schools programme since we launched our work at the Anna Freud Centre. We know that unless we support school staff and school leaders, then we cannot support the mental health of our children and young people. So those are the 5 areas that we've identified. These are our 5 steps in our framework. And when you go onto our website, you'll be able to click on those in any order. And for each area, you'll have some background and some context information. You'll have some actions that you can work through as a school or a college, and some resources and tools that you can use to implement those actions. And most importantly, there's some case studies of schools that are already doing great work in this area, and they can share their learning, they can share what they've achieved and how they've gone about doing that and what's worked and what hasn't. And it's really a useful place for sharing knowledge. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. Thank you so much. So as I said at the beginning, the 5 steps framework, we'll be looking at this across the year and having a different seminar across the year. But today we're going to be focusing on leadership. And I'm really pleased that we have David Frost here today, who's an expert in school leadership. And he's going to tell us a little bit about what the research tells us about leadership and how you can make that culture change in your setting to ensure that good mental health benefits everyone and education can be the best possible experience it can be for all, including staff. And then we're going to hear from Julie Greer, who's a head teacher in the south of England, who really is leading change from the front. She's already embedding mental health across her whole school incredibly successfully. And she'll tell you about how she's gone about doing that and what has been the impact for her and her staff and her pupils. So thank you very much. I'm going to hand back to Peter now, and I look forward to hearing from David and from Julie. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jamie. And the way that you dealt with that slide getting stuck was absolutely as good. Seamless and showed the years of as a teacher, you have acquired those capacities of dealing with the unpredictable that inevitably happens.
Yeah. Can I just say that my slides were really colourful and beautiful and had all kinds of great pictures, but it doesn't matter. No one will ever see them, but it's okay. I'm okay with it.
Your generosity is yet another feature that you're an absolutely wonderful colleague and a brilliant leader. Another brilliant person, David Frost, who I have real pleasure introducing. David Frost is currently an Emeritus Fellow of Wolfson College, Cambridge, and founder member of HeartScan Network's Board of Trustees. He has served as a teacher in the UK state system before joining the university sector as a teacher educator. His doctoral study focused on the development of programs to enable teachers to lead change in their schools. In 1996, he joined the Faculty of Education at Cambridge, where he was able to continue his interest in teacher leadership. At Wolfson College, he was one of the founders, the Leadership for Learning Group and Faculty of Education. By building partnerships with local education authorities, schools, and teachers, David was able to develop the HeartScan network, which subsequently became an independent teacher-led organization. It is now a registered charity, which continues to support school and teacher development. Through partnership with schools and local authorities, he has developed strategies for supporting teachers as agents of change and activists in the creation and transfer of professional knowledge. David has been a leading academic in the field for more than 30 years, focusing his research and teaching on educational leadership and schools improvement. He has contributed to educational development all over the world through publications, presentations, and collaborative projects. He will help us to think about the conditions within schools that favor innovation and leadership strategies that help to create the right environment for change. In particular, he will address the question of the links between school leadership and mental health. David is an extraordinary contributor to this field, an exceptional intellect, and we are really very privileged to have him here this afternoon.
Hello. I'm trusting that I can be heard. Obviously, we're in a strange new world of Zoom conferencing. And I'd just like to assure you, in case you're anxious, that I really am wearing the complete suit. I have trousers on and everything, because I know people do all sorts of odd things in these circumstances. So glad to have got that out of the way. Thank you, Peter, for a lovely introduction. That's very generous. And I shall proceed, if I can, to my, I think I'm having the same difficulty that our last speaker experienced. The button I normally press doesn't lead my slide forward. Oh dear. Right. So I also need assistance in going through the slides. I'm afraid. The normal buttons that I use don't seem to work. Can I get some technical assistance, please? Okay. Okay. Thank you. So, my first slide. The challenge of leadership. We are in extraordinary times, are we not? And never before have we really needed, to such a great extent, a focus on mental health and indeed good leadership. So my aim really is to help us explore how to enable changes in practice to really take place in school and how to ensure that the school is an environment in which mental health can really flourish. And obviously, those two things are connected. You can't separate them really, because if you want change to happen, it's most likely to happen within a particular kind of context. So that's the kind of focus for what I want to say today. So next slide, please. I'm sounding like Chris Whitty. So leadership, very often people use all sorts of shorthand and don't really think carefully enough about what leadership really is. I've heard people say, for example, use the word leadership to mean the people on the senior leadership team. Oh, leadership have said this, and leadership have decided that, which is kind of an odd way of using the term, I think. So if you look at the literature, you've got a pretty coherent view from wherever you look, whether it's educational literature or literature from organizational studies. So Leithwood and Reel are Canadian researchers, and simply put, providing direction and exercising influence. Direction and influence. It challenges, doesn't it, the assumption that leadership is just about somebody powerful making decisions on the behalf of the rest of us. It's actually about influencing, and with something like promoting mental health, that's what we really need. So Yuckel is not from the world of education at all. A classic book, they're into about the 6th edition now, I think. But again, the word influence exerted over other people. So, if you apply this to teachers, it's sometimes quite challenging. If you're asking a teacher to try to influence their colleagues because they have a particular strand of development they're interested in, it's quite challenging. But all people, whether they are senior, whether they're the head teacher, the school principal, or simply a member of the staff, face that same challenge. How do you really influence people in a way which makes a difference to what happens in their practice? Thank you. So let's just think about what we can learn from the literature on school leadership. And obviously it's something I've been delving into for many years. So I want to just help us explore that. And I think there are 6 dimensions to it if we really want to kind of give it a frame to help us think about what the study on leadership can tell us. So the first dimension is leadership and transformation, which I'll say a bit about in a minute. And the second is leadership as a practice. Again, a moment ago, I suggested that it's a problem when you use it to refer to a role, but it's a practice. And the third one, leadership and learning. What is the relationship between those two things? And the fourth one, leadership and culture building, because I think that's the key, and that's something that Jamie has already mentioned and so on. So dimension 5, the distribution of leadership. So again, sometimes people just talk about it as an alternative approach to leadership, but I'm going to argue that it really is distributed, whatever you do. And then 6thly, teacher leadership, because for my money, this is where you really get a big bang for the buck with leading change. You need to empower teachers. So let's take one of those one at a time. Leadership and transformation. Now, I suppose the first point to make is that leadership really can make a difference. And if anybody is feeling in a leadership position and feeling rather impotent, it's true. Research has told us consistently over the years that you can measure actually the difference that different kinds of approaches to leadership make. So, can we stay with the number 1? Thank you. But the important thing is that it's got to be transformational. So transactional leadership is a more limited approach where you simply sort out individual problems. And if you're seeking to run an organization and keep it problem free, then as a senior leader, you're probably intervening to speak to this individual and sort out that squabble over there with these people. But transformational leadership, much more fundamental. You're trying to change the environment. You're trying to build that capacity. You're trying to build a vision so that people share that vision. So there's a coherence of values and ideas. So that's where the direction setting comes in. You have to work with colleagues to try to build that sense of coherence and agreement. Sometimes it can be done by organizational restructuring, but we must not get carried away with that as being, create a structure and that'll sort it. It's much more than that. To build a culture is much more than that, because it is about building certain values and so on. So what Leithwood and Jancy have always argued, and they've done a lot of research on this, is that you can show that this kind of transformational approach to leadership does result in everybody in the school having a much higher level of personal commitment to what the organization is all about. So I think that's really important to bear in mind. So dimension 2. So leadership as a practice. I find this quite difficult to talk with colleagues in schools about. If you think of it as a practice rather than a role, it opens up the whole possibility that it's something that everybody can do, perhaps not all as well. And certainly you would expect a head teacher and the deputy head teacher and people in that team to be really good at it, to be experienced practitioners of leadership. But if you really want change to happen, you need to enable everyone in the school to develop as much of that capacity for leading as they possibly can. So these are just a few examples, the bullet points here. These are the kinds of behaviors that I suggest that leadership consists of. So influencing, we already mentioned that. Taking the initiative, coming up with an idea and saying, look, what about this? How about this? Offering to support people. Isn't that a powerful leadership practice? If you want something to happen in a classroom, isn't it best to say to colleagues, how can I help you achieve this? Is there something I can do to make this easier for you? And so on. And holding others to account, again, people without the positional power do find that difficult. The idea that it's up to them to say, I really don't think that's acceptable, or I really think you ought to consider this. It's harder to do the less power and status you have, but nevertheless it's important. So those are just a few examples. I could make a much longer list, of course, but the point is these are activities and behaviors that anyone can be developed. Anyone can develop in themselves and build their own capacity. Dimension 3, please. So leadership and learning. Again, we need to unpack this, think about this in a sophisticated way. It isn't a simple business that leaders lead and teachers teach, which is the sort of crass thing that I've heard before in the past. Leadership and learning is something that happens throughout classrooms and schools. The Americans have an unfortunate way of talking about the idea of instructional leadership, and I've been asked to speak at conferences on instructional leadership, and I've not wanted to do that because I've just lost something. I've just lost. It doesn't matter. I can see it at the top. So, an unfortunate Americanism, because instructional leadership, we don't talk about instruction in this country, but of course that comes from the problem that in America they used to have this problem where school principals knew nothing about what happens in classrooms, and so they were encouraged to get involved in what they called instruction. We would call it pedagogy or teaching and learning. So when I was part of the Leadership for Learning group in Cambridge, we explored this in depth and we did some research on this. And it was really about how leadership and learning are two sides of the same coin. So in a sense, if you look at both concepts, leadership and learning, and say, well, they actually both need agency and moral purpose, both in trying to exercise leadership and in trying to learn. We need that sense of commitment, that sense of what is the right thing to do, and that sense that actually it's up to me. I have to take responsibility. I have to make my contribution. And so you might want to read about that in the book that we published relatively recently. But this is discussing how leadership for learning involves certain principles, for example, shared leadership, shared accountability, and dialogue, and so on. So could we have the next slide, please? So we used to put forward this wedding cake idea, so that learning is taking place at all those levels. And of course, leadership is too. So student learning is connected to teacher learning, which is connected to school learning. And there's a little mistake in the slide here, because the other one is system learning. So, you know, if schools are learning in a sense and networking, then the system is learning. Could we have the next slide to show that leadership is what joins these 4 layers together: student learning, teacher learning, school learning, and system learning. Thank you. So you might want to learn more about that. But dimension 4 then, leadership and culture building. I think this is the key, and it's something that Jamie mentioned earlier on. Edgar Schein wrote a classic book, which has again gone through many different editions over the years. And this is a really important thing he said. The only thing of real importance that leaders do, and he means chief executives here, that leaders do is to create and manage culture. The unique talent of leaders is their ability to work with culture. And it's interesting that when I've traveled the world doing research and so on, I remember some research we did in Kazakhstan. I used to pose this question to people in schools there and people in what we would call kind of local authorities about how you would build your organization so that it changes the culture. And I was met with incomprehension. It was just not something that made any sense, because in that country at that time, a few years ago now, the senior leaders just couldn't conceive of being able to change their organizations or to build a culture. It wasn't something that ever occurred to them. And you know, any questions about the organizational culture was, well, the ministry tell us how we should organize the school, and that's that. But in this country, the UK, we are privileged, are we not, that school leaders can actually think strategically about, do we have the kind of culture, the dominant values, the beliefs, the norms of behavior necessary for the kind of environment we need to create, for the change we need to make happen. So senior leadership teams have this awesome responsibility. They can, of course, play around with structural levers to create that culture change. But in the end, it's what everybody does. It's what everybody in the school does to promote and embrace particular values and to, as it were, work together on those norms of behavior and so on. So really important, culture building. And here's an example. My colleague Val Hill was assistant head teacher at Birchwood until recently. And I said, give me an example, Val, of how you think your senior leadership team in your school would attend to this question of building a culture. And she gave me just this one little example, which I thought was rather good. They have this feel good week, she told me. And during feel good week, all members of staff are invited to send an email to say something nice about a colleague. And these comments are then passed anonymously to the colleague. So you just receive an email saying, this is why you're a really good person, you know, and what a wonderful thing to receive. And many of people, of course, responded by saying, oh, that's lovely. You know, and then, of course, they didn't know who sent it. So they would send an email to all staff saying, thank you so much, whoever you are. And so that was really great. And another part of Feel Good Week was the teaching staff during that week always made coffee and biscuits for the canteen staff, who of course used to normally do that for the teachers. But it was just a way of generating, you know, that kind of social capital, that quality of relationships between different contributors to the life of the school. So I thought that was a lovely example that Val gave me there. So for the next slide, another example, talking to a colleague who is head teacher at Morgan's Primary School. I said, can you give me an example? And she said, we've introduced mindfulness workshops. And these are for teachers, but also for students. Because she explained to me that teachers are facing all of the usual challenges at the moment, but plus the pandemic. So mindfulness really helps them to be aware of their own thinking and their own emotions, to focus on the present moment. And then they can free their minds to attend to those daily, safety issues without being anxious about those longer term future things like preparing for the SATs or whatever. Alice, Alice has appointed a mindfulness lead, a teacher who will take responsibility for this, a real change agent who runs a course for each class and works alongside the class teacher in this sort of rotation around the school. So if you want to find out more about what Alice is up to, that I've put her website on the slide there. Next slide, please. So leadership as a distributed phenomenon. I have heard people say, I mean, perhaps in the distant past, I've not been able to talk with colleagues in schools other than through Zoom recently, but people will often say, oh yes, we distribute leadership here, I always kind of worry about that because, very often when people say that, what they mean is they've asked somebody to take on this role. They've asked somebody to be responsible for developing that. So that's a kind of delegation. It doesn't necessarily mean that leadership is going to be exercised. So I think what's worth bearing in mind is that actually it's a kind of given that leadership really is distributed. So if you look at what's happening in any school, there are things happening all the time, and there are many people doing many things. Hopefully they're doing them collaboratively and together. And what they do makes a difference to what other people do. So leadership really is distributed in the first place. And you might want to look at that YouTube video. It's had a hell of a lot of hits, apparently, because it's a really good explanation of that very idea. So I think what senior leaders might want to think about is the idea that you need to maximize leadership density, which is about enabling leadership to happen, enabling as many people as possible to be contributing in that way, but also orchestrating it. So in other words, you don't want chaos, you don't want people leading in all sorts of odd directions, but you want to enable people to talk together, to come together, to establish some kind of coherence in the direction that everybody's going in. So it's about orchestrating and enabling, I'd suggest. So thank you. And dimension 6, the sixth of my dimensions. Teacher leadership is quite an enthusiasm for me, I have to say. I've been talking about teacher leadership in the UK and abroad for quite some years now, since the early 2000s. It's something I picked up on because I was reading about it from the American literature. And of course, it came to the fore in America in the 80s because in those days, the school principals were just administrators. They had no handle on what was happening in classrooms. And the federal government put in some money and said, look, you need change agents in your school. So we'll give you this money if you appoint a teacher leader. And I went over and met a lot of people who occupied this role, the teacher leader role. And I must say I was rather disappointed to find that they didn't necessarily know how to exercise leadership, and they weren't necessarily successful in exercising leadership. But now in the UK, we had quite a different approach. We didn't used to talk about teacher leadership at all because, of course, we had middle managers. I was one myself back in the early 1980s. And then, of course, we began to say, oh, well, let's not say middle manager, let's say middle leader. And the National College was formed and all of that. And the idea was to try to enable people with those responsibilities to exercise leadership. So middle leadership became the hot topic, didn't it? 2000 or so, that sort of period. My difficulty with it is that that approach, it has got two difficulties. One, it limits leadership activity, leadership behavior to those people with those roles of responsibility. And why would you want to do that? Why would you want to shut out the others and risk that others may not regard it as their problem? And secondly, the system puts middle managers or middle leaders, as we now say, under such enormous pressure such layers of accountability that actually makes it very difficult for them to exercise leadership, because they're managing resources, they're managing the pursuit. In some cases, I regret to say, the quick fix approach to achieving those higher attainment levels. So in HeartScan, we've always talked about teacher leadership in a much more inclusive way. We want to extend the professionality of everyone, everyone in the school, so that leadership becomes part of their reality. Could we look at the next slide, which just says a little bit more about professionality? So professionality, it really is about a teacher constructing themselves, seeing themselves as, it's about their identity. Somebody who sees themselves as a member of a team, not just as an individual. Somebody who thinks they are agential, or they should be. They should engage in leading change. They should be guided by educational principles and a sense of their own moral purpose, rather than simply whatever they are told they have to do. And they should discover how to improve things, not by being endlessly told, not by simply relying on what an Ofsted inspector says, but discovering how to improve by evaluating and reviewing their own practice, and creating professional knowledge through the development work that they're leading, and through the networking which they can talk to others in other schools, and to get a sense of what they understand about the particular things they're interested in, or how to lead change, and so on. But crucially, this kind of professionality is about seeking to influence others by exercising leadership. So the next slide, please. I do think it's a different concept to professionalism. Professionalism is often talked about, and most commonly in political situations. There's been terrific punch-ups in the past between unions and government about whether or not teachers are professional enough. Do they have sufficient professionalism? I think we should forget that. Concentrate on, how do we see the role? What is our mode of professionality? So next slide, please, which brings us back to my teacher leadership. So the last item on that is that if we really want to have this inclusive approach where we enable anyone to extend themselves and to exercise leadership, what we call non-positional teacher leadership, because it doesn't depend on having a role. You may have a role, fine, but it doesn't depend on it. Then we provide, in HeartScan, we provide programs of support to enable teachers to lead, design and lead development projects, and to do many other things to enable them to exercise leadership. So I don't assume that you can just say to a teacher, oh yeah, you exercise leadership. It's not about permission. It's not even about encouragement. It has to be about enabling. And I think you need very specific tools, in the same way that Jamie talked about tools to help people develop mental health support in schools. To develop non-positional leadership, you need tools and positive, a positive framework of intervention. So next slide, please. So here's an example of what I mean by development project. I just fished this out of our book. You can see at the bottom there, we published a book quite recently. And Lindsay was on one of our programs, and she designed and led this project in which she wanted to really change the nature of the role between teacher and student. She invited students to take on this project where they would teach the teachers to play an instrument. And all this was outlined at an informal lunch, and the teachers and the students came along, and 3 teachers joined this, and they started having lessons from students who were teaching them to play guitar or trumpet or the violin. The head teacher joined, and I was very impressed when I went to visit her to find a music stand in her office, because she had to practice. And the students would observe what's going on, and they used to post things on Instagram, and the teachers posted things on Instagram, and so on. And they extended the discussion beyond the school through Twitter and all of that. All led to a great concert at the end of the year with students and teachers playing together. Really impressive. And Lindsay was just, a teacher who had support in framing that project. And of course, her senior leadership colleagues there welcomed her intervention and showed that they welcomed it by volunteering to be part of it. Next slide, please. So a key part of our support is this step-by-step process. It's really important not to simply say to people, oh, go ahead and lead change, but you need to lead them through carefully, a clarification of their values, their concerns, to enable them to identify an agenda, to enable them to negotiate with colleagues about that agenda, to turn it into a concrete action plan with further negotiation, and then to be able to lead the development work. And then to share the stories of that through networking, so that colleagues across our network can learn from each of those projects. I've heard Lindsay, for example, talk many times about her project and what she learned from that. So we provide a program of workshops by experienced facilitators, all of them teachers, of course, and they use the materials and the tools that we distribute. So they can help teachers to go through this process and come out with successful outcomes. And the next slide, please. Yes, and now I think it's interesting to note just how well this travels. I mean, we've been working internationally since 2008, and it seems to me remarkable that colleagues in schools in all of these different places you can see on the screen there have welcomed this, and they've perhaps put their own interpretation on it, but they've welcomed it in such diverse contexts and said, yes, this is really important. This will help us to develop new practice in our schools. And not all of those countries have programs still active, but still active in Bosnia, still active in Macedonia. In fact, I was speaking to the colleagues last week there. In Moldova, it's gone nationwide. In Kazakhstan, we're very active, and so on and so on. So, you know, it's been a concept, this non-positional teacher leadership that travels, and we have been very proud to share our approach with colleagues in these different countries. So coming towards the end, we try to document what we do. We've put out many publications in which we try to show people not only what teachers can do, but also what the people who facilitate can do to help those teachers. So in our books, you will find many accounts of both teachers' projects and programs that support them. The next slide, please. This is just a list. I mean, I'm not going to try and read it or anything, but this page and the next page are just a list of items that we've published. And here is an image showing the kind of books that we have published recently. And the latest one I mentioned there with Lindsay's project is the green one. And there are 16 accounts in there of teachers leading change. So I think I'm coming to the end of my presentation. I just want to do a kind of summing up. Oh, that's just to say that some of these books are actually in different languages too. Thank you, that's enough. So a reminder, I'm suggesting that we should think about leadership under these 6 headings: leadership and transformation, leadership as practice, leadership and learning, leadership and culture building, leadership as a distributed phenomenon, and specifically teacher leadership. Thank you. So to round up now, I just want to say that, you know, the implications of this discussion is that if we really want to improve mental health in schools, I think we need strategies that concentrate on creating the professional culture in which colleagues can feel recognized and valued and respected and connected to each other. So in other words, that their well-being and mental health is taken care of by the way the culture develops in that school. And in turn and related to, they are therefore empowered and colleagues are enabled to contribute to the leadership of initiatives to develop practice. Clearly, to use the 5 steps program, it seems obvious to me that we need to build the right kind of environment, and we need to empower people in the school who can do something about it, because it does require the development of practice. And of course, lastly, we do need to consider other stakeholders. It isn't just the teachers, but it's others, students, parents, governors, because everybody needs to contribute and participate if we're going to be successful with this enterprise. So I hope that has provoked a bit of thinking, and I'll close now, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, David. That you didn't sound a little bit like Chris Whitty. Let me just reassure you, just in case there was something that you were concerned about. You sounded enormously persuasive and full of insight that which I think all will find valuable, and very high level conceptual, but at the same time practical and immediately applicable. So it is, I think, a mark of a real leader yourself, being able to bring about a change in leadership, I hope, in mental health. I would like to come back to this in the discussion, but before that, I want to introduce Julie Greer, who's I've had the pleasure of introducing before, but she is again an exceptional individual, a head teacher of Sherbrooke Primary School in Hampshire, a mainstream school which specializes in the social and emotional development, mental health needs of children. We are very, very lucky at the Anna Freud Center to work closely with Julie, and she's a long-standing member of the Anna Freud Center Quality Assurance Group, which has supported the work of the Mental Health and Wellbeing Schools in Schools program. She's a visiting fellow of Southampton and the University of Southampton, and a founding fellow of the Chartered College of Teaching. She's a member of the Department for Education's Expert Advisory Group for Wellbeing for Education and Return that I had pleasure meeting her recently, and has recently completed a long-standing term on the National Executive of USET, the University's Council for Education of Teachers. Her book on workload for early career teachers will be published in November, and I'm sure many of us are looking forward to that, if that has some answers in it for that particular problem. Julie actually combines all the best in school leadership, blending together research and practice, learning and humility, and a very deep understanding of working with children to create active and supportive communities in schools. Julie, 5 steps, over to you.
Lovely, thank you very much, Peter. I think Natalie's going to do my slides for me, so I'm hoping that will all go fine. So thank you. Move me out the way so that I can see my slides. Lovely, thank you. I'm sure that many of you, if you are in leadership positions at the moment, are already quite exhausted by the current challenge. And I think maybe like me, you had a honeymoon period where everyone was really pleased to have a sense of normality back in school, with everybody back in, and that's perhaps been followed by a resurgence of anxiety, I guess, related behaviours, across the whole school community. And so I think this is really pertinent today, thinking about 5 steps, thinking about all of the things that we need in place as a school community, especially at this moment, to support our staff, to support our parents and carers, and of course particularly to support our children. And I'm really conscious, just picking up on the questions a little bit as well, and thinking, one of the questions was thinking about sort of Black Lives Matter, for example, and I think that's really important that we bear that in mind, that everyone that we're working with, every one of us that is part of these teams, that we are, we all have numerous priorities, and we all want to put all of our energies into one particular priority, perhaps, and it's about how we can have sort of the coexistence of those priorities as well. Really, really important, and I hope we can give some practical examples in the next few minutes as well. So thinking about the 5 steps Jamie mentioned, and particularly focusing on leading change. So this slide, that's lovely, and through again, thank you, to the next one. So for me, leading change, it's been lovely to hear that picked up as well by David, but it's about working together. It is about everyone together, always, and that's the thing, that we have to use sort of conscious effort. Unfortunately, a lot of leadership, I think, doesn't fall into that those aspects where you don't know that you know anymore. You know, when you're driving down the motorway and you suddenly think, how did I get this far? I don't even remember driving. That's what I would call the don't know that you know, because you're just doing it automatically. And I do think, whilst there are aspects of leadership that are great, you know, if you can sort of sail through, I think there's so much of it. If you want to be respectful, if you want to really bring your team, you know, with you and work alongside everyone, then that has to be conscious thought. A lot of it, these are skills that you can learn. It's all, you know, it is absolutely doable. But I think so often, you know, I've been ahead for 30 years nearly, and I slip up, you know, most days, and I think, you know, I appreciated that word humility. I hope I live up to it, but I think you have to be humble as well. You have to say sorry when you get it wrong, and you do that, you making sure that you are all in it together, and it is about making a difference, because I think, and we can apply this across lots of priority areas, but it's all very well being well-meaning, and it's all very well, you know, having a good heart, but actually we do want to make a difference. We don't want to maintain the status quo. Things do need to change. There are too many young people with mental health that impacts on their learning. We need to make a difference. Next slide, thank you. So this is what I would call our ordinarily available provision. I like that notion. This is not about going out to specialists. You know, of course, I would, you know, absolutely want to work with those that can support us, with children who, and families who are really sort of at the edges of what we would be capable of trying to support them with. But actually we have a moral responsibility, in my view, and that's supported by the government's green paper, by the work that's being done to roll out the expectation that all schools should be able to have provision that supports the mental health of their communities. And of course 5 steps is just perfectly placed to do that. So it's about clarity of values, shared and understood by all. I'll come back to that in a little bit. Trusting relationships, modeling, developing, and like I said earlier, it's teaching those skills. And I guess that ties in with that notion of leading teaching, and actually being able to make sure that we know how that works. We're just trialing. Over the years, I've tried several I guess models of supervision. We're trying a new one at the moment, which I'm quite excited by, and very much about putting the ownership onto the individuals as a head. I don't need to know what those individuals have discussed within their supervision. This is for them to take ownership, for them to bring to their performance management if they wish to, but it is an opportunity, a space, a safe space in which they can also be really reflecting on their professional practice, and actually how external forces impact on that. And I think again this is really important, the imperative of this for now as well. We are, you know, we're giving everything at the moment, and that's really, really important for our children, but we also need to look out for ourselves, for our staff, making sure that we are staying healthy, staying mentally healthy. Consistency of practice. For me, that's absolutely key. Boundary flexibility. Again, I think that's the idea is that, you know, it doesn't have to be the same for everybody. You know, you do need boundaries. It's really important. We have professional boundaries that we have to stick by, but in order to meet the needs of individuals within our schools, and you know, within our school staff, then actually knowing when we can be flexible. This works for children as well. When we need to give it a little bit, you know, okay, we'll come in a little bit, you know, later tomorrow, absolutely, because, you know, of course you need to be with your mum, you know, while she has, you know, while she goes for an appointment or whatever. And then it's about that goodwill bank, that giving and giving back. At other times you need to be flexible, because actually you can recognize as a leader, perhaps, and in conversation with your member of staff, that they really do need you to be reflecting with them about how they're coping at the moment, how they're managing. So there's all sorts of possibilities, that sort of transactional analysis, I guess, within that sort of knowing when to say no, when to say yes, when to say, well, yeah, if you want to, and when to say, okay, let's work on this together. Promotion. really, really important. Actually, our mental health champions decided the best place to put the posters was on the back of the toilet walls for the staff, because it is true. It's probably the only time we stop for a few seconds, isn't it? I don't know about the men on the other wall anyway, but it is a really useful place to have it. Curriculum, again, very important. Teaching about mental health, assemblies, circle time. Just before I left school this afternoon, I had this conversation with one of our year 5 teachers, saying, actually, the children at the moment, they're finding these long days as well. There's lots of tiredness. They're finding this quite difficult. Have a look at your planning next week. Let's have a look and see what can we build back in, what can we build in as extra into next week to really support these children, to go back to thinking about kindness, go back to thinking about noticing in each other those qualities that are that they like in each other, remembering it's not just about self, we are about teams, and training, obviously, really important. So moving forward. Thank you. And so I just quite like this notion, really. Policy, obviously, is massively important. I think it is important that we write policy that reflects the good practice that we have. So it is about us identifying our effective practice within school, but also, and this is again where 5 steps come in, looking at good practice beyond our school through research, through involved professionals, through colleagues, and actually building that in. So we're not just keeping a tiny bank of what we know works well in our school. We're building on that. We're adding to that. I was delivering some training yesterday, and in between I was sort of writing an email or writing a draft email to staff, because there were some great resources there that I thought were really good, and somebody came up with this lovely notion of snakes and ladders, and how every interaction can either be a snake or a ladder. Sorry, I've now stolen that as well, but it's I think it's that magpieing, isn't it? And through that, then we create our policy. And the reason I think it's really important to do it that way is because otherwise you end up with a policy that's just been given by somebody, whether that is the leader or the governance or whatever. And it's much harder then for staff to buy into that. This way around, they recognise what's good, they recognise the importance of it, the imperative of it. And then through that, it doesn't just become, static, that actually it grows and develops. And for our mental health policies, that is really important that we go back and look at it. We've had to go back and reflect on our mental health policies in relation to COVID-19 as well, and see what that looks like. Are we providing enough for our staff? Are we providing enough for our children? What are our what bank have we got there to support the children? So thank you. Next slide. So about creating a culture, I always love the notion of walking the talk and being a role model, and it's lovely to hear that echoed through as well today. Involving all stakeholders, really, really important. It isn't, I've noticed that in one of the questions as well, your families are so important to making a difference to what you do within schools. So how can you involve them? Again, I'm a big fan of making sure that children have a voice in decisions that affect them. So absolutely. At the moment we have our little COVID busters team, representative from every class, and they are so brilliant. They're so fantastic at really thinking about the impact of the changes that we're making on the children within their class and feeding that back. So for example, I've just sent out today some information on keeping your hands not just clean, because we were doing lots and lots of that, but actually then keeping them soft, because with winter coming as well, and lots of hand washing, we're going to have lots of sore hands. So it's about how can we look after our hands in that way. Delegating meaningful ways. So it's really important for me that we do have our mental health champions across the staff as well, and it's not just something that I do as the head, or that actually it goes across the staff and through the governance as well, so that they also take a really invest in it as well. Sharing kindness, I just have to, we must remember to do this. So my latest thing is I'm not going to say anything about anybody unless I would be willing to say it to them themselves. And that is, of course, that's right, and of course, it's important. But when we all operate in buildings, with particularly under particular pressure, you know, it's too easy to fall into that, you know, or just talking about somebody. And we really do need to be kind to each other, particularly now, if ever. So I'm going to really hold, I've said it publicly, I've said it nationally now, I've got to hold myself to it, really important. Promote your key messages. A website is really important, newsletters, posters, etc. Children love doing posters, and they don't, you know, we won't keep them up forever, but the good thing is that renewal of them as well. Next slide, please. And I think it is, again, I love the word performative, I use it all the time now, but avoid performative well-being. And I don't know if you know what I mean by that, but it's, what I mean is, I think we don't want the sort of well-being steps. We don't want the well-being changes that you know, that just are done for show. We don't want it so that when somebody comes in, it looks like you're doing well-being. You really do have to do well-being, and that's, you know, challenge yourself. Who am I doing this for? Who is this actually making a difference to? You know, is it just so that I can say I'm doing it, or actually, and I know I don't doubt that anyone listening will think, oh, I'd never do that, but we really must challenge ourselves, and I do that myself as well. You know, actually, you know, this does look glossy, it looks good, but has it made a difference? So let's really be robust on this. Thank you. Next slide. So just a quick bit on the benefits of 5 steps beyond well-being. Children feeling valued and their feelings are validated, and this builds esteem and impacts on their motivation, engagement and attainment. We mustn't lose sight of that. It is, you know, massively important. We want to improve children's mental health so that they can, you know, they do come to school, so they do well when they come to school. That's going to make a big difference to them in the long term for their economic futures as well. And that staff recognise their mental health and well-being are recognised. That sense of team and models respect for relationships and builds attendance, and reparative relationships as well, being able to repair our relationships with each other. Children and staff have a shared vocabulary and focus, impacts positively on parents and carers as well, and well-being is promoted and communicated within the school community, and this impacts on the feeling of belonging and inclusion. Thank you. Next slide. And that's it. Thank you.
And thank you, Julie. That was delivered exactly as advertised, if I may say. A wonderful blend of a person coming with experience to a problem that we all face, and you have addressed it in a way that's accessible to everybody, and you showed us how you can offer yourself as a magpie, as it were, to be
always.
Yeah.
Thank you, Peter.
So it's lovely. I hope that everybody else can come back and we can ask some questions. I've got a number of questions here already, and if we can have David back and Jamie back, and very good, and Julie back. That's great. I would read out some questions. The questions are coming in. I would like to encourage more questions to come in, and we'll try and deal with as many of them as we can. But one, first of all, what is clearly a question to David, more information, please, about feel good. How can I find out about how can I feel good? Tell me, David.
Yeah, very easy. Val Hill was the person who told me about it. She's part of our team at HeartsCam. So on our website, you'll find the means to contact the administrator, I guess is the best way, and just say, can I get in contact with Val Hill? The other way is that the head teacher of that school is actually one of our trustees. So that's another way to get some information. Birchwood High School in Bishop Stortford is the school, and I'm sure they'd be very happy to share what they've been doing.
I was going to say, Peter, we also sometimes do every now and then, because it's useful to bring it in occasionally. We do something called Guardian Angels, and again, it's an anonymous, and you fill out a few things that you like, and then that's anonymously given to somebody else, and they just check in with you. And they may be, you know, if you really like dolphins, they leave a picture of a dolphin, or put a dolphin card in your little, you know, in your pigeonhole and such like. So just little ways of remembering each other and respecting each other.
Jamie, you wanted to say something?
I was just going to add also, we've because we've done quite a lot of work on supporting staff, we've got some resources on our website which is very much speaks to that, and we've got some lovely case studies of schools doing all kinds of things like that. Quite a few schools I'm aware of now that do wellbeing weeks, which are not just for staff, but they're also for pupils, and they're also for parents. And there's lots of really lovely ideas, really practical things that you can do, like David and Julie have talked about. But we've got some examples of those, Peter, on our website.
Thanks. Whilst you're in the middle of my screen, Jamie, can you perhaps, and others can contribute as well, explain the extent to which families will be engaged in this change, and how would you explain to families the changes that need to take place?
So I think that's a good question, and I think that we've been trying to do that in the work that we do through schools. So any resources that we produce for schools, we try to produce a kind of an accompanying resource for parents and carers, because we need to bring them on the journey with us. So when we're encouraging, you know, I'm encouraging schools to talk about mental health, and that's fantastic, and we can talk with children, young people, and teachers can do that. But we need those conversations to translate home as well. So anything that you're doing in school has to translate home. And Julie, I mean, I'm sure that you've got great examples of this, but we're truly, through our work, trying to encourage schools to support parents and carers to have those conversations. And we have, again, some literature and some leaflets and some ideas of how you can do that, how you can bring parents and carers with you on the journey, and support them to have those conversations, because it's not always easy. So you want to think about kind of supporting people to have the language to have those conversations at home and think about mental health. But Julie, I'm sure that you've got great examples, I know you have, of work that you're doing with families in your school.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, both individual, which is really important. So a good example at the moment would be that, you know, would just make sure that there is a member of senior management on all playgrounds at all times at the start of the day. And I think that's just because, you know, with social distancing, but obviously we've stopped that access of parents going into classes, in to see their teachers. But it is really important they still feel part of the school community, that is still buy into the changes that we've made to keep, you know, children safe. And so I think it's about making sure that there is still an avenue, and I think we're going to need to build on that, because we're recognizing that, you know, parents obviously do want some, you know, some individual contact. So yeah, just trying to find ways to do that. We're putting lots of things on our website as well, like you say, leaflets home, posters up.
David, question to you, a difficult question. What if leaders can't accept that children or staff do not have good mental health?
Yes, now I can see that that's a problem, and your organization is doing everything you can to promote the issue. But something occurred to me was that if you are genuinely enabling members of your team in school to contribute their thinking, then what I've noticed in Hartscam, in schools in Hartscam, is very often the initiative comes from one of the members of staff who says, you know, I really think we have a problem with this, you know, and maybe we'll talk to other colleagues and say, you know, am I the only one that recognizes this? And before you know it, there's a proposal to frame a project, and they go to talk to people on the senior leadership team, and they say, you know, we're worried that we think we have this problem here. You know, can we make a presentation to the senior leadership team? And you know, one thing leads to another, and eventually, if the head teacher didn't think it before, they have come to understand that actually this is a really important thing to back. But if they're committed to building the kind of culture that we were talking about, yeah.
Whilst you're still up front, you wonderful area of countries that you have identified that you're working with. Why does school leadership appear to be more accepted in some countries than others? And how well is it appreciated in this country, do you think?
Well, in the many countries that I've visited and talked to colleagues there about this, we find that people find it liberating because they're used to being told what to do. I think it's unusual for us that we have such autonomy in schools, and we have a certain professional autonomy as well. In many parts of the world, people are drowning in instructions and being held to account in a rather strict way. So the idea that you could empower people to really think about their own leadership and to take the initiative and so on is a breath of fresh air. We found when we went to the Balkan countries, the Serbia and Bosnia and so on, people said, this is about building a democratic way of life, isn't it? And we'd never really used that language before, but we said, yes, it is. And when we went to Palestine, it was about, well, this is actually going to help us to frame our own voice and have a sense of emancipation. So people see different values in it. And I think colleagues in this country that I've worked with have seen that if you can enable teachers in the school to begin to be innovators and to want to collaborate to change things, it's a big plus in the school improvement box, if you like. You know, if head teachers really want improvement to take place, they go beyond the quick fix and they say, this is about enabling our professional culture to develop. So it's not doing it instead, but it's working with schools to build that professional culture, I think.
Thanks, David. Now, question to Jamie. You'll like this one, Jamie. In schools, the word budget always comes up. How can we support heads not to worry about affordability? And Julie can comment from the side on this one.
Yeah, I mean, budgets are so tight for schools at the moment. I mean, what I would say is that, of course, we always need more money in schools, but what I would say is that the 5 steps framework is free. And the majority of the steps and the resources and the tools that we recommend are completely free to use. Of course, you need staff input to that and you need staff time, but much of the work that you can do through 5 steps is completely free. So, for example, the resources that we have through Mentally Healthy Schools, all of the resources that you can use in your school setting, completely free to access. We've got lots of information there about parents and carers, how you can set up kind of working groups in your school, how you can engage with governors. These are all things that schools are doing anyway. So it's just about making sure that the mental health element is in there. The tools for measuring and monitoring, again, free to access. So these are things that schools can pick up and run with. So I think the thing that I'm really proud of about our 5 steps framework, Peter, is that it's not a cost to a school. It will cost you in times of doing some of these things, but the resources themselves are completely free.
Wonderful. Julie, a question to you. How can we have schools prioritize mental health for staff and they're working so hard to catch up and get schools running normally again, as well as dealing with children and young people's anxieties?
I guess it's because you can't separate those elements really, and I think particularly at the moment, unless we do invest in our staff, unless we do recognise their anxieties, we recognise anxieties in ourselves as well, and unless we encourage that vocabulary, we encourage the systems for people to be honest about that, then we are just going to have greater absence from staff, and that of course impacts hugely on children. So it's almost it is an imperative. We just have to find ways to do that. And I think, as James is saying, it's although it's time of course costs money, but actually it's a small cost put in now as a preventative that means that you're not spending massive amounts further on down the line. So if you can actually support a few children who themselves are feeling very anxious, and that may be coming out with poor concentration, hypervigilance, if you can put in the right things to support them at the start, then that is less likely that they're going to end up sadly being taught somewhere else with 1 or 2 adults having to be with them, which is never a great solution. So it's investing now in order to you know, make change that will really, you know, have a much greater impact in a positive way on the budget further on down the line.
Thank you. That's extremely helpful. A difficult question to all three of you. How can Black Lives Matter and mental health be addressed in schools at the moment? I thought that would. David, do you want to start? Or
Sure, I'm happy to comment. I can't claim to have any special knowledge on this, but again, I think it chimes for me with the idea that we need to enable many voices to be heard. So it isn't just saying, you know, oh, we don't have a problem, do we, or whatever, but enabling everybody to talk about mental health, leadership, and so on, and practice, and to enable voices who may have felt marginalized, may have felt not part of the normal conversation. The more dialogue, the more likely, and perhaps that means parents too, the more likely we are to be able to enable those conversations to take place. And as I understand it, one of the big issues is, how do you enable people to actually have conversations about these, the issues that might be around racism or discrimination and so on? Enabling people to bring it into the conversation is so important. And therefore we need those cultures in which voices can be heard and listened to and respected.
So surfacing is important. Jamie, do you want to add?
I was just going to say that, I mean, schools have been asking us about this. We've had lots of dialogue with schools saying, can you give us support on how to do this? And so through Mentally Healthy Schools, we put together some resource packs and some toolkits which encourage exactly what David says, encourage really useful and organized conversations about Black Lives Matters, about racism, about institutional racism, encouraging children and young people to talk about this in the classroom and talk about it with their teachers and with school leaders and with their parents and carers. And so we've got some, again, some useful kind of toolkits and resources that support schools to do that in a really structured and helpful way. And we've had some really great feedback about that. But yeah, I would agree with David. It's about making sure that we're hearing everyone's voice, which is also what we want to do through the 5 steps. Is about engaging the whole school community, making sure that you're empowering children and young people, also parents and carers, and also staff.
Julie, can I ask you a question? A question has come up, is a question about Wellbeing Committee on governors who, would it be appropriate to broaden this out to include a pupil, include pupils? So.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's a really interesting challenge, really, to make sure that you hear children's voices. That, you know, is a child representative of all other children, or are they a representative child? And I think that happens across all aspects. So there is a danger potentially in some school councils where they, you know, it becomes entrenched in the views of a few. So I think what would be really important would be to see how whoever, you know, having a pupil that's able to have conversations and to inform governors are really important. But how can you make sure that the voices of all the children in the school, or the voices of, you know, the classes, the representative views from classes are also, you know, able to be represented to the governors. And obviously at the moment it's much harder for governors to come into schools, to come right into classes, break into bubbles. So I think it sounds like a really good idea to find ways. I mean, Zoom, kids love Zoom, you know, it's a great way maybe for, you know, have a governor on a Zoom meeting with some pupils across the school talking about well-being.
Yeah. Okay. Now, there is a question that's linked to this, which is how does this work break down stigma, especially when mental health has cultural stigma around it in certain communities? So we're talking here about participation. We're talking here about bringing things to the surface, including teachers, being inclusive. There is an issue underpinning all mental health, which is the question, really around stigma that we really haven't cracked properly, although it's a lot better now than it's ever have been. Any final words from any of you about how can we lead ourselves out of this, David? How can Jamie? How can we partnership ourselves out of this? How can we, get an atmosphere, Julie, in a school that stigma is confronted directly? Who wants to go first?
I'll just say dialogue, talking, and having a vocabulary with which to, that has no judgment in it is massively important.
I just echo that. It's all about building the environment in which it is safe to talk. And that's good for mental health. It's also good for that general productivity within a school.
Jamie?
Yeah, I mean, I just think start as early as you can. So, I mean, for me, it's about talking about mental health straight away with really young children. And I agree with Julia, it's about giving people the language to talk about mental health. And we definitely support that here at the Anna Freud Centre. We've got lots of resources that tell you and talk about how can you talk about mental health, how can you do it with children, how can you do it with families, and how can we get people talking about it? Because I agree, Peter, I think people think that the stigma bit has been done and it hasn't. We've still got a long way to go. So when schools can start early, as soon as they have children and young people start talking about mental health, that's when they'll see a real difference.
I think 6 o'clock is gone. I'm being a dreadful chair, letting this go on longer than it's designated to. So I'll just want to end by thanking the three of you, all in your own way, absolutely brilliant people and real leaders in David's sense of that term, not because of your positionality, but because of your capacity to transform, to learn, to establish a culture, to distribute that knowledge, and really be able to share your wisdom, which seems to me to have been this afternoon all about, or a lot of it at least, about bringing a community along with us in leading some kind of revolution within schools in terms of mental health by creating a movement within the school that embraces these ideas. And you have, I think, brilliantly exemplified in three quite different ways how that can be achieved. Thank you so much on behalf of all of us here. Thank you, David. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Jamie. Goodbye for now.
Thanks, Peter. Bye.
Bye.